So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome General H.R. McMaster.
And I believe that the war in Afghanistan, the war that is ongoing today, is the most underreported war in American history. This even in the information age, when we should have greater access, really, to information and what's happening. And of course, the stakes in Afghanistan, in the Middle East today, are very high. And we are engaged with enemies in Central Asia and Afghanistan in particular, and in the Middle East, who really pose a threat to all civilized people, who want to murder our children and the children of all civilized people. And they use this irreligious ideology, it's irreligious, and we could talk more about that if you'd like afterwards, to perpetuate ignorance, and to use that ignorance to foment hatred, and then to use that hatred to justify the murder of innocent people. And I think these groups are particularly dangerous today because, in the past, maybe they would have been isolated. They would have been, in some remote place in the world, and they would be gripped with their ignorance and hatred but not really pose a threat except at the local level. Today, they're even more dangerous because they can communicate with each other. They can mobilize resources. There are three main Taliban groups in Afghanistan who are drawing safe haven support bases in Pakistan. The first of these is Hezb Islami Gulbuddin, and these are the ones who just took responsibility, for a mass murder attack in Kabul. And this is the group that's particularly adept at political subversion of the Afghan state through existing state institutions and functions. And the second group is the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network, their principal tactic is the mass murder of innocent people. I mean, they're responsible for the biggest car bombs and that sort of thing in Afghanistan. And the final group is the Quetta Taliban, is led by Mullah Omar. If you think about war and the continuities in war and warfare, really there are four, I think, main key continuities. The first is war is an extension of politics. So we fight wars to achieve a sustainable political outcome consistent with our vital interests. The second is war is profoundly human and involves tribal, ethnic, cultural, psychological dynamics that really defy any kind of way of predicting the future and demand that we operate effectively on land in particular. The third, I think, continuity in war and warfare is that war is a contest of wills. And we're talking about that a little bit here as well. And the fourth is the future course of events of war is unpredictable. And so we have to be prepared for unforeseen events, circumstances, demands, and so forth. And I think that those continuities are often neglected. So defeating the Taliban, though, is the first of the four things we have to do in Afghanistan. And that's really ensuring they can no longer effectively pursue their strategy. And if you think about why did the Taliban collapse, the Taliban regime collapsed in 2001, it was mainly because every Afghan was convinced of the inevitability of their defeat, right? I mean, we had some very important physical effects against enemy organizations, but really the main victory was a psychological victory. And so what are we doing today? What do we do now to convey that kind of determination in this contest of wills that is war? The second thing is that we really need to harden the Afghan state, help harden the Afghan state and its security forces against the regenerative capacity of the Taliban, which lies across the border in Pakistan. And this has a lot to do with really consolidating, again, strengthening Afghan institutions. Afghan institutions are infiltrated and subverted by criminal organizations. We could talk more about that if you'd like. And so it's important then to really strengthen those institutions. The third key thing that has to happen is Pakistan's behavior has to be supportive of moving Afghanistan towards security and stability. That's a diplomatic function. And the third thing is international support has to be sustained for Afghanistan. But to honor those who served both in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'd like to share with you the words from a letter that was written from the mayor of Tal Afar, Iraq, in 2006 to the soldiers of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment This is a city that had become the main base for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. The city was held hostage in the hands of his henchmen. He wrote, "God bless the families who dedicated these brave men and women. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank the families. They have given us something we will never forget. To the families of those who have given their holy blood for our land, we all bow to you in reverence to the souls of your loved ones. Their sacrifice was not in vain. They are not dead, but alive, and their souls are hovering around us every minute, every second of every minute. They will never be forgotten for giving their precious lives. They have sacrificed that which is most valuable. We see them in the smile of every child and in every flower growing in this land. Let America, their families, and the world be proud of their sacrifice for humanity and life." So if you've ever doubted the positive impact of our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, I think this letter speaks for itself. It's unfortunate you don't often hear that in the media, and you don't understand the effect that our soldiers and our Marines in particular, alongside other servicemen and women, are having and have had in both countries. Veterans, you've answered your nation's call to service at a time when our nation was committed to 2 wars. You knew that you would serve in combat. You have secured our fellow Americans and our way of life. I am proud of your service, grateful for your service, and grateful for the opportunity to have served alongside you. You know, generals, and General Myatt will agree with me on this, I know. Generals are not heroes, but we have a great job because we have the privilege of serving alongside heroes like you. So veterans, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be in the company of you, to be in the company of heroes tonight. And I also want to thank your families. I want to thank your spouses. I want to thank your parents. I want to thank your sons and your daughters for the support that has allowed you to serve. You know, one of the key things I think that we have to be able to do as a military, I think our Army just defines this pretty well. We see we have 2 fundamental competencies. One is combined arms maneuver, and that's maneuver to seize, retain, and exploit the initiative over the enemy, essentially to defeat enemy organizations. And then the second thing that we have to be able to do is we have to set security conditions, what we call wide area security, so that we can consolidate gains and achieve sustainable outcomes consistent with our interests and worthy of the sacrifices that we've made in this war. I think that the problem that we've had both in Iraq and in Afghanistan is a difficulty in consolidating gains. And those gains have to be consolidated physically from a security perspective, as our Marines are doing, for example, now in Helmand, as 3rd Infantry Division is doing with their forces in Kandahar, obviously much heavier reliance on Afghan forces and so forth. But they also have to be consolidated politically. They have to be consolidated in the area of rule of law. They have to be consolidated in the area of really military support to governance. And you know, our military, Marine Corps and the Army in particular, have always had to do this, always. And then what happens is, you know, we come out of a war like this and say, man, we don't want, that's the hard part. We don't want to do that anymore. And then we just assume we're not going to have to do it anymore. I mean, we've always had to undertake the broad range of activities as part of civil military teams to consolidate gains and achieve those sustainable outcomes. In Iraq, we had a mixed record in doing that. And a lot of that has to do with our difficulty in operating on battlegrounds other than the physical battleground. And we are, you know, for our military, I mean, for sure, I mean, that's what we do, right? The physical battleground. But our enemies operate on multiple battlegrounds. They operate on battlegrounds within state institutions and functions, a political battleground, a criminal battleground. They also operate very effectively on the battleground of perception. And in Iraq, these militias associated with really a Shia Islamist agenda in particular and associated with the Iranians infiltrated and subverted key state institutions and undermined the status of forces agreement and so forth, but also undermined the political settlement there. Ayad Alawi won the election. And then a judge ruled that it's not the party that wins the election that gets the first crack at forming the government, parliamentary government. It's the party that's in power now. It's crazy. That was unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Iraqi constitution about that. But that was the Iranian agenda, and they were able to carry that out through the judiciary in Iraq. And how effective were we at countering that subversion by the Iranians? Not effective enough, apparently, right? So the capture of the Iraqi state by parties who were pursuing a narrow, particularistic agenda that's compatible with the Iranians undermined the political settlement. And the political settlement in Iraq was critical because people had concluded, based on our efforts to broker political accommodations at the local and national level, they concluded they could advance their interests best through the political process rather than through violence. But after that election and the aftermath, and after the latest problems with elections being suspended, the attacks that you've seen, both Shia on Sunni, Sunni on Shia, from extremists in both camps who are trying to jumpstart again large-scale sectarian violence, Iraq is in a very difficult position. It's in a difficult position because of this reason, the Shia-Sunni issue, but also because of the Kurd-Arab issue associated with the oil-rich regions in the north in particular, and because of the potential for bleed over of the conflict from Syria. So I'm very concerned about Iraq. Iraq does have some really good things going for it. I mean, courageous Iraqis that we serve with, many of us. But it's really going to take a huge diplomatic effort, I think, on the international community's part to hold Iraq together, prevent it from descending into large-scale sectarian and ethnic violence like we saw in 2006.
I'm glad we're recording this because that's a lecture on the situation in Iraq that we want to be able to watch and watch again. I think that was very good. I appreciate that, and I agree with that, by the way, which I guess makes me as smart as him. But